like to welcome everybody to the October edition of the PastorCast. I'm your host, John Musica, and we're excited that you've joined us this month. The PastorCast is a monthly program presented on the second Tuesday of each month. It's designed for pastors and church leaders, and we bring pastors and leaders that serve churches to the PastorCast to discuss topics that are important to you. This month, we're going to be discussing church construction trends, and I'm happy to welcome three friends, real treasured friends, to the PastorCast today. I will introduce them, let them say hello, and then we'll jump right in. Chris Lindberg is the lead pastor of Life Fellowship Church in Allen, Texas. Chris, you've been there, is that 5 years?
Yeah, coming up on, about 6.5 years.
Six. Yeah. All right, 6.5 years. Time flies when you're having fun. And they are nearing the opening of their new building in McKinney, Texas. I got the pleasure to work with them and sell their existing building and then help them find a piece of land. And Chris, has been a great pleasure to serve you. And I know you guys are excited to get ready to open that building here before the end of the year.
Woo! Yes, we are.
So our next friend that's going to be with us is Deborah Sweeney. And Deborah is the owner of Anchor Point, church construction consulting firm, and she actually has been working with Pastor Chris on that project. She's a great friend. She's the owner's rep for Life Fellowship, and we've worked on quite a few projects together: Preston Trail Community Church, One Community Church, Watermark Community Church, and she worked with a little church called First Baptist Church of Dallas. Small little project she did there. Yeah. Didn't you work with the implosion of that project?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was a 7-year project, and so part of that was the implosion. One of the highlights.
Well, that's a great project. Yeah, everybody would want to see that. This is Deborah's second time with us on the PastorCast. She was with us, I think, back in 2014 or 15, and so Deborah, welcome back today.
Thank you.
And then Tim Cool is returning to the PastorCast for the third time today. Tim is the owner and founder of Cool Solutions Group. Tim and his team serve churches and lead organizations to be intentional with the planning, development, and life cycle management of the facilities that God gives them to steward. Tim is the author of Why Church Buildings Matter and the co-author of Church Locality, and he's been on the PastorCast for both of those books as we discussed those. And so, Tim, welcome back, and thanks for joining us again today.
Thanks, John. It's always good to be with you.
So today what we wanted to do, construction costs in our work here in Texas have risen dramatically. And churches went through a lull, at least here in our market area, of not building. Really from about 2008, 2009, they really slowed down for probably 3 or 4 years. And we're now seeing, because of not as much land available in certain areas, that construction, or not as much existing buildings are being available, that churches are starting to consider construction again. And churches like Chris Lindberg's church and others are saying, okay, let's build a building, and costs have risen. And so as churches are going through this process of considering a building project, we really wanted to bring in the perspective of a pastor and some experienced folks in church construction to talk about this with pastors today. So Pastor Chris, why don't you start and tell me a little bit about, as you're nearing the end of the construction process, what were a couple of the biggest surprises or challenges you faced that you would want to share with pastors that are considering a building project?
Yeah, I would just say that before you ever launch out into something like this, you just need to know that you know that you know that the Lord has spoken into your heart that you're to move forward on this. In other words, if the only thing holding you back is brick and mortar, move forward strongly, and God's going to be there along the way, because there have been so many challenges that I personally I've experienced. You know, it's the week in, the week out, the writing of the letters, the speaking of the messages, the lunches, the dinners, the home gatherings, all of that. As the lead of the church, everyone takes their cues, their inspiration, their energy. A lot of it flows out of who I am and the dream that God has put inside of me. And unless I had known that the Lord had definitely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, spoken to me on that, I think that I would have become very exhausted in the process. And instead, what we found is that people, they rallied around the vision. It galvanized our church in unbelievable ways that I never expected possible. And I'm just beyond thankful that the Lord allowed us to do that. You know, a challenge that we did experience was, early on in the process, when we reached out to you, John, we were trying to find a different place to be relocated. And that was a daunting challenge for us because the area that we live in, it's very progressive, very fast-paced. And the city itself fought us on all the prime real estate locations. In fact, we found an incredible piece, prime location. It matched all the prayer requests that I had, being in a place of legacy, a place of a landmark, in a family destination, had all of that. And the city looked at us and said, we're never going to allow you to build there. And I never anticipated having so much challenge from a city for certain locations. Now, they would have said, hey, you can go build in some obscure, hidden, hard to get to neighborhood, but in a prime location, they were adamantly against us on that. And thank the Lord came through and provided us an incredible miracle in the process there. I would say that another area that we really face challenges is not just even in the building of the building, but understanding that we're not just moving from one location to another location, but we're moving to another location with the anticipation of extraordinary growth. And so we've got to enlarge our organizational structure. And when you're in the middle of a building program, money is scarce. You are tucking away as much as you can. You're raising as much as you can. And yet you're having to expand your organization so that when you get in day number one, and I didn't realize the pressure of the finances that would have incurred in my life beyond a shadow of a doubt. But like I was saying at the beginning, when the vision has been spoken clearly, consistently, transparently, it's been unbelievable for me to step back and go, I'm so thankful, because we have had some of the most incredible business leaders, high capacity folks come on board with who we are, because I think that great vision attracts great leaders. And I'm thankful that the Lord has given us his green light to move forward on that. And we're just humbled. Well, one last thing, John, let me say this before I throw it back at you. If there's one piece of advice that I could give a pastor out there, it's this. It's to get the right people around you. Because here's the thing that I know. I'm great at a few things. I can see it, say it, seize it. I've got those things on the inside of me, but I have no idea how to negotiate it. I have no idea how to put the details together. I have no idea how to do all the things that, for instance, Sweeney, she has been a godsend for us. Mm-hmm. John Musica and Church Realty has been a godsend for us. We read through Tim Cook's book before we even started, and it has been a godsend for us. And we're thankful for the people that the Lord has surrounded us with.
Well, Chris, that's good. You've done a great job. I've watched you. I shared your website here with folks that are, if they have video capabilities that can see this. You guys did a great job casting vision, preparing for this, and it's been really great to watch. And I think you're right, especially when it comes to a construction project. There's lots of things that we don't know and we're not prepared for. And to have seasoned individuals who understand, who've been through construction projects, who've seen the process, you want those people on your team. And so, Deborah, let's talk about that. I know you're actively working with Chris and with other church projects here in Texas. And I've been doing this work now, working with churches for 10 years. We've seen a dramatic increase in construction costs. We used to tell churches $125, $150 a foot for ground-up construction, not counting FF&E. We used to do that, and now we're sitting here with churches getting $250 and $300 a foot quotes. Talk to us a little bit about what you see that are driving those costs, and then maybe a couple of steps that churches can take early in the process to hopefully save some money?
Well, yeah, everything has really escalated. It's been a little of a shock to everyone's system because a lot of churches, when we weren't doing a lot, were getting some quotes on some of their design, and then we go back after they've decided to move forward, and those quotes have really escalated, and it's been a shock. And it's like, wait a minute, we didn't change anything here. Why is it so high? But in the Dallas area, everyone is so busy because it seems like everyone started construction really at the same time. And of course, with the new Cowboys area and Toyota moving in, all of these companies that we've relied on for skilled labor are busy. And so unintended consequences of this have been escalated pricing and then schedule delays because we can't get people on site. They're tied up with other projects. So the skilled labor issue is a big deal because there are openings for people that if you've done it in the past, you've got a job. You can just pick up the phone. And so we're always trying to find the skilled labor that can actually complete the projects. And all the companies that do the mill workers, the HVAC people, they're just swamped. And so as a result, their prices have gone up. The prices on equipment has gone up as well, but the labor costs have really gone up. And you just can't find them to come and do your job. And then when you do find them, they're busy doing something else, and you have to put it off for a couple of weeks. So,
so before you go on to the saving money, a couple of years ago, it was prices were going up because of materials. And I've heard over and over lately, it's all about the labor. And that's just because there's so much going on. And I remember when Chris was getting some of his first bids, some kind of contractors were estimating how fast they could build things and the timelines they were throwing out. And I remember getting a timeline from a construction company, Chris sharing that with me and me going, whoa. I was shocked that builder even said they could deliver it that quickly. So as you start to talk about how churches can save and prepare for, as Chris's casting vision to his group, hey, we're going to move in by this date. Talk to us a little bit about preparation and how churches can be prepared to save dollars on their facility.
Well, I think that this might sound a little odd, but if churches will simplify designs so they're not real complicated and complex with a lot of different roof lines, a lot of different looks, and it's some of those things are really mounting up because it takes so much longer to build them. Not that everybody needs to do a box by any stretch of the imagination, but just simplifying a design is a smart thing to do when you're trying to save money. And also knowing exactly what you want to build. Churches are notorious for making changes along the way that end up costing them a lot of money. That's going to be true in any situation, whether the costs are high or low. Churches really do change their mind a lot. But if they really think ahead and know exactly what they want to build, then they can really save a lot of money throughout the process. I think that's what Tim's company does a lot of, is trying to just make sure, what is your vision? How do you get there? And then stay with that vision. Don't be going to the left or the right. Keeping the scope. I wrote a couple of notes, keeping their scope intact. Obviously, reducing change orders. That's everybody says that. Everybody says, I'm not going to have a change order. It's unlikely that you won't, whether you realize it in the construction side or not. There are change orders because there is not a perfect 100% set of drawings out there anywhere. And so there are going to be changes. There's going to be unforeseen conditions. But if you can really think ahead and hire a really good contractor. Some of the contractors that I'd like to have right now are too busy to do a job, and I'm like, what? How can that be? We really need you on this job because you can rely on them, that they say what they do, and some of the others right now are not doing as much as what they have done in the past just because they're so busy. And I don't think they mean to. I just think that they end up having some issues. And let's see what else. oh, don't delay your project. Because a lot of churches really, get decisions quickly. Let me put it that way, because a lot of churches wait to make a decision because they've got to talk to this different group of people. But if you can get everybody in the room together, make some decisions, and go ahead and move forward in today's market, it's better to move forward and not delay, because it's just costing more the longer that we wait. And in Dallas, the construction industry is not going down. We call right up here by where I'm at, they call it the $1 billion mile, because there's that much construction going on. So don't delay. Go ahead and make a move, but move smart.
That's good. So, Tim, you've worked with churches across the country. Have you seen a significant increase in other areas? Is that something unique to Dallas, or is that something you're seeing as well?
It's not unique to Dallas. I think Dallas is probably caught up in the Southern California of 10, 12 years ago, when that part of the country just went through the roof, and you couldn't buy a nail for less than $20, and supply and demand was part of it. Just as Debbie said, you guys are just so busy. We see that in other parts of the country. We're managing a project in Kentucky right now that we're still, well, if we were repricing it today, it'd probably be about 15% higher. And we're 2 months out from final completion of construction. And labor's clearly a big piece of that. Here in the South, we're seeing a couple of big material changes. Steel's gone up and is scheduled to go up another 10 to 15% after the first of the year. And anytime steel goes up, that impacts door frames, it impacts conduit, and impacts metal that's on your HVAC units. And so it's not just the structural steel that gets impacted, it's anything that's got metal in it. And for most churches, which are complex commercial structures, that's going to be 50, 60, 70% of the building is going to have metal in it in some form or fashion. I know down in Texas, you guys use a lot of precast, and while that maybe seems like, we'll save money because we're going precast or tilt up or something like that, it's still got rebar in it, which means it still has metal in it. And they use forms that are made out of metal, and that's just a big impact, at least what we're seeing across the country. So as you and I talked a few weeks ago, John, we're not seeing quite the same dollar per square foot tick up that you guys are, but we're not too terribly far behind here in the Southeast.
Well, I get lots of pastors I talk to, and it's not just here in Dallas, but they'll call us or they'll visit our website and they'll say, well, we're looking to build something, and in our area, we think we can build it for $90 a foot, or we know contractors, and they're going to build it for us for $125 a foot. And I'm real cautious to tell anybody to use a number like that. I want churches to plan conservatively, to plan for the rainy day, to plan for the extra things that might come along. What are some of the things, Tim, you're seeing that churches can do early on as they're being intentional, talking about their mission and vision, how they can save dollars by doing that from the very beginning?
Well, first off, and I'm sure Debbie would agree, if you find anybody that can build it for 125, you let me know, because I'll hire them, and then I'll mark it up. I'll mark it up to what the current value is, and we'll both retire. That's just the name of the game. As far as how to save money, let me jump back on something that Debbie said. Is I think that if churches will spend more time up front during planning and pre-construction, you will never avoid a change order. But you are more likely to not have the things that are going to reach out and just bite you in the butt and cause either delays or increased cost. We've got a project right now that we're managing that the church wants to keep changing things because they didn't want to spend time up front. And we're not just paying for time and material now, we're paying for frustration of the contractors. And so we're paying the stupid tax, if you will, for not taking the time to do it up front. And the church wonders why to add a TV receptacle now that's $1,500. And well, I'm sorry, that's what the guy's going to charge us. And it's not like we can say, well, we'll get someone else to do it for us. No, you won't. So I strongly encourage you to take the time up front and properly plan it out. While it may not save you dollar per square foot on what it feels like up front, I assure you in the long run, it'll save you dollars per square foot.
No doubt.
As far as, how do you save money in a project? The other big thing is to start off with a realistic budget and don't forget to build in contingency. If you're starting off and today is your first day of dreaming, then if you don't have at least 10% contingency built into your total project budget, then you're just kidding yourself. And even through construction, if you don't have at least 5% built in when you break ground, and don't release a dime of it until at least all your site work's done. At least what we find in our area is site work is the biggest unknown. I can tell you what a footing's going to cost, and I don't care how many soil borings you had. I can't tell you what the site work's really going to cost at the end of the day.
Right.
Just because of the pockets that you run into. So plan on the contingency. Going back to what Debbie said, do it sooner than later. But if you're going to do it later, build in an inflation contingency. If you're just starting to plan today and let's say you're using $200, $225 a square foot for just the building portion, no FF&E, no site work, anything like that. Reality is you won't be in that building for at least 2.5 to 3 years. So if you don't figure a 3 to 5% inflation for each year of those 3 years, you're going to end up at the end of the project and you're going to be short as far as the amount of money you're going to need to close out the project.
Sure.
And so not just build in a design and construction contingency, but build in that inflation contingency, and make sure you got the money.
Sure.
I've had the opportunity to work with about 400 churches to build buildings, and I'm yet to find one that did one without money.
Right.
I've never seen a contractor take manna or goats. It takes money. And so make sure you got the money in place to get it done.
Well, let me add to what you both are saying. And when it comes to selecting your site and to save dollars, a big part of it is the site you purchase and the due diligence you do before you own that piece of property. I've seen churches that have bought a piece of property because it was cheap, only to find out that in order to build on it, that land was no longer cheap. It sloped the wrong direction. It had a too steep of a grade, or it didn't have the right access point. So they didn't have enough frontage, so they had to buy more land to get more access points in order to have a church on that site. We've seen churches not count that cost. So just because something is cheap does not mean it's good, and just because it's good doesn't mean it's going to be cheap. And so,
on top of that, John, even more than topography, if a church buys a piece of land because they got a deal on it, and then find out that there's no sewer or water for their sprinkler system, and you got to bring water 3 miles away, then all of a sudden you've paid more for water than you have the land. Yeah,
there's church projects I've come across where churches have bought land out, speculative out that's going to be where the development is, but you're right, the water and sewer was not there, and so first phase was pulling water and sewer a mile or 2 miles. I know one project that got stopped because you had to pull it 500 feet, but it was just that big of an expense to that church. They ended up selling that piece of property. Pastor Chris can tell you, as we searched land all over Allen and McKinney and in that area, and some land sites were really expensive. They would have been ideal. Others, maybe they didn't have the right utilities. Maybe they didn't have the right access. So we come across these things. You can't just fall into one piece of dirt and go, well, God's giving us this. I get churches all the time. Well, we just want to put up a sign. If that owner will let us put up a sign, we'll raise the money and then we'll build on it. And I strongly encourage churches not to do that, because you're going to lead your church down a path to a project you cannot complete. So Tim, your wisdom about saying make sure you have the money, you have the ability to raise the money. Pastor Chris, you've done an excellent job with your congregation and the challenge where you've had to raise some money through the process. You've done a wonderful job of casting that vision and keeping it going. And now you're going to have a prime spot in the middle of right on 121. It's going to be really great to see that, but you have to have the dollars, and you have to have done the due diligence before you own that property to make sure that site will work for you. Yeah. Let's talk for a few minutes about picking an architect and a builder. I think these are two critical decisions as you start to plan and you build a facility. I've had churches that have gotten their quotes, they've picked their builder, and then when it comes time to actually build it, it comes back 30% higher than the original quote. Tim, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Debbie. What are some pieces of advice you give a church as they're selecting contractors?
I wouldn't select one. That's the best advice is don't hire a contractor or an architect. No, just kidding. If we can build without them, I would be all in favor. And after having spent 23 years in the general contracting business, I know of what I speak. But when you start to explore the general contractors, it used to be really, really important to get a general contractor that's done church work. Mm-hmm. I'm not of that same mindset right now. While a contractor that understands church is beneficial, I don't think it's as mandatory as it used to be, particularly if you have someone such as Debbie or myself on the team that can bring that context to it. What you really need is a really good contractor that can build, that's got a good reputation, that's got a low mod rate, that's got a low bonding capacity, all the type of things that make them a qualified contractor. Now, at the same time, if you get a contractor that is used to blowing and going on a retail space and doesn't understand that on Sunday and on Wednesday night, that's when that church needs to be open, and they're not sensitive to that, you run into a problem. Now, from an architectural side, I am more inclined to want to get an architect that has church experience. I think that's, again, contractors don't spend your money, architects do.
Okay? That's good.
All a contractor does is spend the money that for every line that an architect's drawn on the paper. And so getting that design right, and Debbie brought up a good point about some of the simplicity of buildings, and I think that's a piece of it. I also think building smaller buildings than what you think you need is critical, and properly phasing it so that as God does bless you, you can afford to build that next phase. So instead of sacrificing, and it becomes a give and take, do I sacrifice in square footage or aesthetics? And so, which one's more critical to the vision and mission of your church? But getting the right architectural team on board, and it's not just the architect, but what consultants are they going to bring to the table? Who's their structural engineer? I've got a project right now where I'm using a Dallas, Texas firm of all places to do my architecture. And after we gave them our geotech, the structural engineer came back and wanted double the number of kips on the steel bearing. And I'm like, you've lost your mind, And he could increase the cost of the building 15-18% just by doubling the number of kips on all the structural components. Mm-hmm. And so it's the whole team. If the team that they bring of MEP guys is used to only doing chillers and boilers and package plants and not DX equipment, your cost is going to be higher. And so it's not just the design; it's all the components that go into the project to make it a whole.
That's good. Deborah, I'm sure I saw you agreeing with a lot of that. What else you had to?
Well, I think specifically in selecting an architect, you really have got to have somebody on board that really captures and catches your vision, because a lot of architects, no, not a lot. Some architects are after a building that is more of a monument to the architectural firm rather than to the glory of God in your church. And so you really need to interview 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. A lot of architects come because of referrals, which is great. And I know some firms here that started not doing any churches, and now then they do a lot of churches because they've done such a great job. But I'm telling you, they made a lot of mistakes right up front, and they've had to kind of fix it because they didn't know churches and they didn't realize several really important things about churches and how they operate. But interviewing 4 or 5 or 6 people that really align with your vision can really come back to you, to the church, and say, this is what we think we heard you say. Let us know if that's the case, rather than having someone just draw something for you, bring it and say, oh, that's a pretty picture. Really align with the architect. GCs, just like Tim said, the GC is just the guy that's going to build what that architect has put down on paper. So it's really important to have that relationship. The GC, you have to look at more from a pricing standpoint of what their fees are, how long it's going to take them to build. You still need to interview the GCs too, because you have to be in line with them too. But it's a real thin balance between just making sure that they understand what you're after.
Well, something I've learned from both of you and Debbie, I think I may have learned this mostly from you, is an architect is only as good as they are at drawing what they've been told to draw.
That's true.
We've run into some, I know we've had situations where an architect they didn't provide what the city needed. I think having an architect who understands what a city is going to look for in the process of permitting and everything, and having good drawings that then the builder can actually come back to. I think having somebody like Debbie or Tim on your team who can sit in those pre-construction meetings and those construction meetings throughout the process. And I'm going to let Pastor Chris speak to this in a minute, because Pastor Chris would say, hey, I can do all the vision, I can do the preaching, but when it comes to a construction meeting, I can't tell them that they drew those plans wrong. So, Pastor Chris, you've been through this recently. Tell me your experience of interviewing architects and then also sitting in those meetings with Deborah, and how that experience was for you.
I come back to maybe there's someone listening. You're incredible at leading and casting vision, but none of us are great at everything, and that's the difference. So when we hired Deb to be our owner's rep, we were getting quotes from different architects and different organizations, and then Deb got in the mix of it, and all the quotes started changing because they know her and she's able to call their bluff. And it actually, there's a cost in hiring an owner's rep, but the amount that it saved us, the amount of headache that it saved us, and the fact that we're getting the quality and the excellence that we were expecting in the very beginning, it helps bring that brand standard to the whole process. I just couldn't speak highly enough of hire somebody to help you do this, because it's complex.
Yeah.
What, John? If I could jump in one other thing.
Yeah.
And Deborah made comment of this about, you show a pretty picture to someone in the church, and what ends up happening is the minute you show that pretty picture, they buy it. Someone emotionally has bought that. Oh, isn't that pretty? That's what we want, and they don't even know if they can afford it yet.
Right.
So, as part of the pre-construction piece, and actually part of what we could call the dreaming piece, the pre-con kind of piece, is if you can't get a firm program developed as to what the space you need, if you can't put together a preliminary budget ahead of time that shows you exactly what you can afford, and not just for the building, but for the total project, including contingency, and if those two things don't line up, then you should never draw a line on a piece of paper from a picture standpoint.
Amen.
If you can't get your budget and your programming to line up, then stop by all means and get those two things to line up before you ever get someone to draw pretty pictures.
Well, Tim, that is so right on. The tweetable statement you made a minute ago, contractors don't spend money, architects do. That's right on, but let me say this. I would add to this, and I think you would too, is it's not the architect's fault that he's spending all your money. A lot of times. Times we did not set a budget from the beginning. You just said this. We've seen churches come to us after the fact where they went and cast a vision to an architect and did not lay out a budget. If you go to an architect and tell them this is what I want, they're going to draw it and they're going to bill you. And it may be 6 figures of billing, and you may have never had the opportunity to build that building because you did not tell him, this is what I want and here's my budget, because then the architect would have known. So many times, you're right, the architects do spend the money, but it's the responsibility of the church to advise that architect, here's our budget.
Yeah, and to pull the plug early enough. I don't know how Deborah does her work down there. We generally try to get our contractors on board somewhere around DDs.
Yes.
So we can get input from them early on.
That's right.
And so, it's the whole team's responsibility at that point in time to say, okay, Mr. Architect, the church said it's $10 million. You're coming back at $14 million. We've got a problem. And so stop drawing right now until we solve this. Our church in Cincinnati that we're working on, they hired a firm from out of town that came in. They told them what the budget was right up front. They never could get within $4 million, and $800,000 later in design fees, they got fired.
Mm.
Mm.
We wish we had that $800,000 back right now to complete the building we are doing.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that scenario here in Texas where groups get fired when those numbers come so much higher than originally bid. And so that's right on. In the instance of in respect to time, I want to be good with everybody's time. So I want to finish on one thing. I think so many churches run so hard to get in a building, and I want everybody to remember this. And I know everybody on this call agrees with this. The church is not a building. The church is the people, the building is a tool. We all agree on that statement. But many times churches run so hard to get into a building and they forget to count the cost of maintaining that facility once it's built. Right. Stewarding that facility well. And I know Deborah has done that in her work. Tim, I know you have your eSpace software that churches can maintain their facility and set budgets and keep track of that. I'm going to share both your websites here while you're talking a little bit, Tim. But Tim, share with us a little bit about maintaining your facility.
Yeah, this is something that has always bothered me. Having built many projects, churches will spend millions and millions of dollars to build something, and then they forget they have to actually take care of it after they move in. It's the house of God, but it doesn't mean that God's magically going to repair the air conditioning system for you. It takes planning, it takes money. In our research that we did for Church Executive Magazine, we found that between 70 and 80% of the cost of ownership of a building over a 40-year lifetime is operation cost, and less than 20% is the cost of building it to start with. And we fail, and staff, no offense, Chris, but it's easy for staff to get so excited about that cool new building, and they forget, you got to buy toilet paper every month. You got to, at some point in the next 20 years, you will replace all your air conditioning units. And the prudent servant starts saving for that now. And so, whether it's capital reserves, whether it's having the right budgets to start with, most churches don't realize you need somewhere between $6 and $7 a square foot just in operation cost that needs to come out of your general budget. And so, are you planning accordingly? Knowing that, it's kind of the Fram oil filter kind of thing, pay me now or pay me later. You could cut that operational budget down, but you're going to pay twice as much for it later in deferred maintenance.
Well, that's so right. And so as we're working with churches, as they're considering a building project, we're talking to them about, hey, make sure you understand what it costs to maintain that facility. Because I've met with churches who said, hey, I'm tired of ministering to air conditioning units. We need to minister to people. And so, Deborah, I know you've not only helped churches build buildings, but then stay on and help them maintain for a couple of years. Share with me a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll tell you, I think I take a little bit different tact to look at it, because churches generally don't feel like their facility department is a part of a ministry group. And I tell everybody it is as much of a ministry group as your youth leaders, your singles leaders. It is just, the facility department needs to have as much respect as the other ministries, because it is a ministry of the church. And it's too long everybody has just thought, well, when you're looking at a mission trip or repairing the air conditioning, I understand why the decision is made to take the mission trip. I'm just saying, let's try to find a balance there to make sure that the facilities are also treated as a ministry, because without the facilities, the ministry is going to not be as effective. And so every church needs to look at facilities as a vital ministry of their church.
Yeah, they too often
they budget it right and they can take care of it.
Yeah, too often the facility manager is the redheaded stepchild of the staff, and let me get all spiritual on you for a minute. But if you go back to Numbers 3 and read about the first keepers of the temple and the tabernacle, they were the Levites. They were the priests of the time. So facility managers were important enough in the book of Numbers to be listed before a youth pastor or a missions pastor were. So you start looking at the importance that even God saw in someone taking care of the facilities that he had entrusted to them. And to Deborah's point, ask somebody next time, how many weeks can you be outside of your sanctuary while the air conditioning has to be replaced?
Right.
That's hey, John, if I could just speak into something on this. My dad, he's built at the campus there where he pastors in Memphis, over 200,000 square feet in the facility there. And they built the building about 20 years ago, and they put it into their budget, their annual budget, every year to tuck away a little bit away every single year. Well, they just had to replace the roof because it's 20 years old, and Tim was talking about that. It was $800,000, and it was such a momentum moment for the church, because he got up and said, hey, everybody, we have to replace this. And guess what? The way that we've budgeted is in such a way that we're not going to have to take away anything from ministry finances. We've already put this money aside over these years. And man, the people had stood. There was just excitement in the house. And it allowed the people to say, wow, we appreciate you for managing the funds of the ministry correctly.
Sure.
And it brought just such great momentum to the church.
Sure.
So those days are coming.
Yep.
Well, what we've talked about today here as we get ready to wrap up is it is about intentional planning, having a budget, having a clear vision, understanding the capacity of what you as a church can afford. And then as you prepare for a building project, is going through the due diligence steps, counting the cost, bringing the right team together. I think all of us here will tell you, we all have our certain strengths. And so bring the right team together and then plan for your building, get the right people on your team, and then maintain and be a good steward of what God has given us. That's what we're here for. And I really appreciate Debbie, Tim, and Pastor Chris, all of you being here. We'll share your websites. This will be on the pastorcast.com. Throughout the call here, I shared your websites. Tim, you can find him at coolsolutionsgroup.com. His eSpace software, if you don't have a way to maintain your facility, you need to check that out. Deborah's website is anchorpoint.net. And Pastor Chris, your buildinglife.org is the website they made specifically for their building project to cast vision. If you're a pastor thinking about a building project, check out that website, buildinglife.org. They did a great job of sharing that vision with people by creating that website. And so just share each of those resources with you. The PastorCast is sponsored by Service Realty. Service Realty is the church real estate professionals. We're based here in Plano, Texas, and we serve churches across Texas and in other areas when called upon. Denver, Colorado, Seattle, Washington. We've done projects in California. So we exist to serve the church and help you through these critical decisions. And so thank you all for joining us today. Deborah, Tim, Chris, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to having you all again next time.
Thanks, John.
Thank you all, everybody.
Thanks, my friend.